welcome! This is our first stitching video for our Be Kind rainbow hoop, and today we are going to start stitching with backstitch on this arc of our rainbow right here, and we're going to talk about a few things along the way. So we need to get a section of floss. We're using our blue color, which is 3810, and we're going to use a section of floss that's about 30 inches to 36-ish inches long. I like to think of that as the length of your arm, give or take a little bit. All right, we're going to be using a big needle because we're using all 6 strands of floss today. You can see that here that a strand of floss is made up of smaller pieces, and we're just going to use all 6. This is just how it comes out of the skein when you wind it up, is 6 strands. Now that our needle is threaded, we're just going to tie a simple knot in the end of our thread. I loop it over my finger, loop the thread through, all parts of the thread through, and then just keep that knot close to the end of our thread, and we are ready to start stitching. Magnet needle minder holds my needle when I am not stitching so it doesn't fall off my hoop or get lost in the couch or poke me or any number of things. So we're going to be working here on this arch, and we're going to do backstitch. So I'm going to be working from right to left. You could go left to right. You could turn your hoop and work up and down. Whatever works best for you. So starting on this bottom corner, I'm going to come up from behind and pull my thread all the way up. Then I'm going to take 1 stitch length right along this line and go down into the fabric. Now stitch length is determined by your personal preference. Mine is, I don't know, 2/4 thick. If you were to stack them on top of each other, not quite a 1/4 inch, a little bit bigger than 1/8 of an inch, whatever feels good to you. Our curve here isn't too sharp, so you pick. Then you're going to come up that same stitch length away on the line, and then you're going to go down. We're aiming for the same hole right here that we already went through, because we want our stitches to sit right next to each other. So again, we'll repeat that. We come up our stitch length away, down our line, pull our thread all the way up. You can see that I caught just a little bit of my tail end there, so I'm just going to pull that from the back until it's gone. And then I'm going to go down right at the previous stitch so that there's no gap between the stitches. And then I'm just going to repeat this process all the way along my line, coming up 1 stitch length away, down into the previous stitch. You can see here a little bit that I press my needle up from the back of the hoop, and I'm doing that at an angle, kind of looks like this from behind. So I'm not pushing in, I'm kind of dragging along the back of the hoop, and that allows me to better see where my needle is and kind of drag it into place. Can be a good way to find where you want to be instead of just making a bunch of little teeny tiny stabs like I just did to try and find where you need to be. So let's keep stitching all the way across, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do next. Right, here's my first line finished. Now we're going to make a second line starting here and going back, and we're going to line up this line so that it's touching the first line. So that means our needle needs to lay next to the stitches. We don't want it to be so close that we're smushing the stitches together, but it needs to be close enough that when I finish my stitch here, that these two are touching together, because we're going to fill in this whole space here using backstitch. So a good way to tell if your spacing is good is if you pull up your needle and you lay it down on the fabric next to the stitches, you'll see that it's not pushing them out of the way. If I was too close, I'd be fighting with the stitches. So there is just a little gap between where I come up and the previous stitches. Now what I want you to think about on this second pass back is keeping your stitch length consistent, because this line is going to be a little bit longer than the first. So we don't want to worry about lining up our stitches with the previous row or keeping them in the middle or something. We just want to make sure that our stitch length is consistent so that when we're finished, we have a beautiful texture through this blue stripe on our rainbow. So I'm just trying to come up with the same distance for my last stitch every time. And now we're done with pass number 2, and we're going to repeat. We're going to get 3, 4 for sure, and then we'll stop and see if we need to make a 5th row. There's 4 rounds for me, and I can still see gaps a little bit along the top here, so I'm going to do 5 rows. If you get to 4 and you cannot see your edge line, or you can see it just a little bit, you do not need to add a 5th row across. You can just anchor off, which I'll show you how in a minute when I run out of floss here, and move on to the next one. So I'm going to add this last row, and then I will show you how to anchor the end of your floss. All right, so I've made it to the end of my thread. You can see here that I've got a little bit left, but it's about the length of my needle doubled over. I wanted to make sure I had enough that I could show you how to anchor. So here on the back of my hoop, I love Backstitch because it makes this nice thick back and it makes it super easy to anchor. So what we're going to do is you're going to slide your needle underneath all of those stitches and pull it out. And if you were super anxious about life, you could do it one more time, changing directions, but once is typically all I do. And then you're going to pull the needle off the end and trim the end. And then I'll do the same thing to start my next strand. I will just slide my needle under and pull until there's just a little end sticking out, and then start stitching, because this thread is not going anywhere now. So I'm going to finish this line, and while I do that, I'm going to tell you what I forgot to tell you at the beginning, which is, I'm sure you've probably noticed that I'm stitching on the front side of my hoop. And if you watched my setup video for this hoop, the tracing video, which I'm hoping you did, you will know that I said you should stitch on the back of the hoop. And this is still true. You should stitch on the back of the hoop. That's where you traced it. That's the easiest spot to do it. Your pattern's not going to warp. I actually find it a lot easier to anchor your thread when you stitch on the back. With all of that said, I moved my design back to the front because it makes filming a lot prettier for you. There's less shadows involved, and it makes it nicer to view. So just remember that I'm stitching on the front only because I wanted it to look nicer for you, not because it is better to stitch on the front. Now, once I get to the end of my line here, I'm going to anchor off once more, and I am going to switch over to our green color for our next video so we can learn whipped backstitch. Feel free to comment with any questions or contact me directly. I'm always happy to answer any questions you might have and help you make the best embroidery you can. Happy stitching!